The Isley brothers' career started around 1957 and they are still recording today. They won 2 Grammys and were given a Lifetime Achievement Grammy in 2014. They were also inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1992. In all, they recorded 37 albums. 8 of them were platinum, 2 double platinum, and 3 gold. The brothers had a lot of hits, and it would be interesting to know who wrote all those hits. Another thing I happened to read was Rudolph Isley is suing Ronald, his brother. Rudolph is mad, okay? He's really mad. He wants to know where his money. So we're going to see what's going on with that. And these brothers have been through a lot during their career, dealing with copyright infringement, imprisonment, now lawsuits, and hooking up with R. Kelly. It's a lot to uncover. So let's get started. But first, I would like to welcome you all to the House of Nostalgia and thank you for stopping by. The Isley brothers were born and raised in Cincinnati, Ohio. Their father, O'Kelly Sr., at one point was a singer and performer himself, and their mother played the piano in church. So you can see where they got their interest in music. They started singing in church the same as a lot of early black performers. They were singing gospel music as a trio. The older brothers were O'Kelly, Rudolph, and Ronald, and they did this under the guidance of their mother. Their brother Vernon was added a little later. They were all young, but Ronald and Vernon were the 2 youngest in the group, and they was just a year apart. Vernon was riding his bike one day and lost his life by a hit-and-run driver in 1955. And he was just a young teen at the time, and this was heartbreaking for the family, as it would be for any family to go through that. A couple of years later, the 3 brothers decided to move to New York in search of a specific sound and record contract. At first, they took the doo-wop sound that was very popular in the 50s, but it wasn't the sound for them. Now, when I think of doo-wop, I don't know, for some reason I think of the Platters, and I don't even know if they was doo-wop, but I can't see the Isleys singing like that. They got a record deal with RCA, and the Isley brothers' first hit was called Shout. You know that classic song, you know you make me want to shout, throw my hands up and shout. Well, it did have some sort of a doo-wop sound in it. This was their first big hit. This album was released in 1959, and the song was written by the Isley brothers. As they always say, you are only as good as your last hit, so they cut ties with RCA later because they couldn't get another hit, and the label may have felt that this was all that the group had to offer. So I'm pretty sure that the label ended up kicking themselves because this group eventually just kept going and going. The brothers signed with Skepta Records in 1962 and released Twist and Shout. Now, it was obvious that they were trying to regain momentum by not having a hit since Shout. And this song did better for them on the charts than Shout did. And I wonder why. Even though Shout was such a massive hit, it only made it to number 47 on Billboard. Now, Twist and Shout made it to number 17. And number 2 on the R&B charts. Shout was the better song to me, period. But that's just me. The Beatles released Twist and Shout a year later, and it was a massive hit for them. In 1964, the brothers started their own label, T-Neck Records, and they were looking for talent for their new label. They asked a guitarist going by the stage name Jimmy James to back them up. Now, this same artist also recorded with the legendary Little Richard, and this artist started using his real name later, which was Jimi Hendrix. In 1965, they signed with Tamla Records, which was part of Motown. Their last hit was 3 years prior, and they were the only talent on their label. Now, these moves that they were making earlier in their career is basically showing you how they maintained such a long-standing career. They were determined to stay in this industry as performers because they could have easily become songwriters. T-Neck was established and waiting, but in the meantime, they needed a hit. The brothers signing to Motown was a good move, and at the right time. The twist and shout era was over and music was moving on. They recorded 3 albums with Motown, with the first album being the most successful. In 1966, they released their first hit with Motown, This Old Heart of Mine, that was written by Motown in-house writers Holland Dozier Holland and Sylvia Moe. The brothers left Motown 2 years later. They were songwriters and good at it, but Motown wasn't trying to hear that because they thought the world of their in-house writers, as they should, because they were hit makers for that era. But the brothers were great writers too, for that era and beyond. They revised their T-Neck label and ended the decade with their biggest hit to date, It's Your Thing. In 1970, the trio recorded Get Into Something, and it was a pretty good album. They were still trying to make something stick. Now, before I get into the music of their 1971 album, Giving It Back, what I found to be very interesting was their album cover. Folk music was hot at the time. It started moving out right before the mid-70s, but everyone was being photographed with their acoustic guitars. And I feel like the brothers were like, let's catch this moment before it leaves. Now, as far as the music goes, I feel like the title gave a strong message. When they did Shout, that was their song, and they gave Twist and Shout life. But in the 50s and 60s, it was the same tune. You sing your song and make it great. Now, I'm going to take it from you and make it number one. And this was their petty moment. And they were giving it back. They recorded James Taylor's song Fire and Rain, and 2 of my favorites on the album was Bob Dylan's Lay Lady Lay and Love the One You're With by Stephen Stills. Now, they recorded Ohio by Neil Young and Machine Gun by Jimi Hendrix. Recording these songs was a message to the industry. They recorded those songs their way, and they were lit. When they recorded Work to Do on their 1972 Brother, Brother, Brother album, this was the Isley sound. This was it. And as we can see, this didn't just happen overnight. Their 1973 3+3 album added the youngest brothers Marvin and Ernie, along with Chris Jasper, who was part of the family. His sister was married to Rudolph Isley, and he was a songwriter too. This is the Isley brothers that I remember when I grew up in my household as a kid, having older brothers. I knew nothing about their struggle before the mid-70s. I knew nothing about that. They recorded 13 albums together. The recipe for their music was a laid-back feel. Even their fast songs were laid back to me. Their music had become more mature since their early years. Having 13 hit-filled albums as a family was amazing. This special time in music may never be done again. They wrote most of these songs, and some of them was just beautiful. They were brilliant. The albums that stood out to me the most was 1975's The Heat Is On, 1977 Go For Your Guns, 1978 The Showdown, and their last album with all the brothers together was 1983's In Between the Sheets. This album was a big hit, and they were keeping up with all the new younger artists. The 3 youngest members branched out and started their own group, Isley Jasper Isley, and they had 3 albums together with their big hit Caravan of Love in '85. The group disbanded in 1987. Rudolph O'Kelly and Ronald returned as a trio in '85 with the album Masterpiece. Now, this album gave the appearance that the magic was gone, that the hits was over, but it wasn't. When the brothers returned in 1987 with Smooth Sailing, it was only two brothers. Sadly, their oldest brother, O'Kelly, had passed away. Angela Winbush had a big part in the making of this album, and her and Ronald married in 1993. So this might have been the start of their romance. And one thing I noticed while making this video that I never really noticed before is no matter what, no brother was ever replaced by an outside member. They kept this group family only. Now in 1989, it was only one brother on the front of the album, Spend the Night, and it was Ronald. His brother Rudolph went back to his start in the church. But Ronald was not alone in music. Angela was there keeping it going. Now the two younger brothers, they returned and joined Ronald in 1992 for the album Tracks of Life. And they recorded 3 more albums together, including one of my all-time favorites from them, their 1996 Mission to Please album. Michael Bolton. Remember him? Well, he was sued by the Isley brothers in 1992 for the unlawful use of the Isley brothers' song, Love is a Beautiful Thing. Now, Bolton's song that he supposedly had wrote was called Love is a Beautiful Thing also, and it sounded very similar as the Isley song along with the title. Now, the brothers didn't waste no time filing this suit, and they were livid, okay? They wanted Bolton's ASCAP Songwriting Award to be revoked. Now, this goes back to the way that the brothers were treated in the 50s, when they were new to the business and felt mistreated by how the industry used their music. Now, the brothers have let countless of recording artists from Whitney Houston, Aaliyah, even Biggie use their music, but I'm pretty sure they had to have permission and pay. Bolton had a sort of soulful voice, and a lot of his early music from the 90s was covered songs from black artists. Well, needless to say, Bolton and Sony Music lost the lawsuit, and they appealed and lost again. They had to pay somewhere between $4 to $7 million. When the brothers returned in 2001 with Eternal and 2003's Body Kiss albums, it was Ernie and Ronald. And they were introduced to a whole new generation thanks to R. Kelly. The Isley brothers worked with younger writers and singers. They brought in all-star producers, and they were eager to work with them. They all grew up listening to their music. Now, this was slightly before people started whispering about R. Kelly, and the internet was starting to take over. Ronald was immortalized as Mr. Big, and this was what the younger generation at the time knew him as. Even that was over 20 years ago. That younger generation should be over 30 now. See how time flies? Now, when I think of R. Kelly and the Isleys, it reminds me of Rick James introducing the Temptations to a new generation with the song Standing on the Top in 1982. And Snoop did the same thing with the Dramatics for It's Doggy Dog World in 1994. So far, Ernie and Ronald recorded 6 albums together, with their last one so far being Make Me Say It Again Girl, and that was in 2022. And it was nice to see them have such a big hit in the early 2000s. Unfortunately, they lost their brother Marvin in 2010, and Ronald did 3 years in prison for tax evasion. But in an interview, he said it was more like a camp than a prison. He was asked how did all of this come about? And to me, he did a lot of double talk. He said a lot, but really didn't say nothing. It just didn't make much sense what he was saying. But he did his time, and he was released in 2010. Ronald and Angela divorced in 2002, and he married Candy Johnson in 2005, and they are still together. In 2021, Ronald and Ernie participated in a versus battle with Earth, Wind, and Fire, and it opened their music up to another generation. He had women swooning over him because Ronald looked good. It was hard to believe that he was in his late 70s then. I hadn't heard a lot of their songs in a while, so it was exciting to watch. Rudolph. He left the group in 1989 to go back to the church, but it seems like he still has ties to the group, and that's something to think about. He is an Isley and one of the 3 original members that started this group. Rudolph said it was an agreement made after the passing of O'Kelly that everything would be split between them. So obviously it was an issue there. He filed suit to let the courts handle it. I hope everything works out for them. Ernie has a daughter that sings, and she has a beautiful voice. Her name is Alex Isley, and she can really sing, you guys. Watch out for her. She is up and coming. The Isley brothers are legends, amazing songwriters, singers, and performers, and they have their own unique sound that nobody can duplicate. They love music. If you like this video, give us a like. I would truly appreciate it. And thanks so much for watching the video on the Isley Brothers.